If you're the kind of person who eats omelets for breakfast, or the kind of person who enjoys adventurous juggling, then you've probably noticed that eggs have gotten pretty pricey lately. It's tempting to blame that cost increase on greedy chickens, but as it turns out, it's actually the work of some vast and mysterious macroeconomic forces that have been hard to predict and even harder to budget for. Which is why, today, we're going to take a look at why eggs are so damn expensive. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History Food channel. After that, please leave a comment and let us know what other pricey foods you would like to hear about. Okay, let's get crackin'. Humans love bird eggs, despite traditionally not laying them ourselves. As a species, we've been eating bird eggs since long before the advent of recorded history, and experts believe that chickens in particular have likely been domesticated for their eggs for somewhere in the neighborhood of 7,000 to 10,000 years. That is a lot of Grand Slam breakfasts. The egg industry as we know it, however, didn't really get cranking until the early 20th century, when farmers would make extra cash by selling the excess eggs that their hens laid. Eventually, they realized there was real money to be made, and they started building large flocks of hens to lay larger numbers of eggs solely for resale. As is often the case, the chance to make an even greater profit quickly led to scientific and technological growth. For example, to improve yield and consistency, the farmers began to keep the hens inside large hen houses, learned to control what the birds were fed, and made important improvements to the sanitary conditions the birds were kept in. Soon they were getting enough eggs to need conveyor belts to collect and wash them. The paper egg carton was then invented in 1911, because you gotta have a way to put all those eggs on store shelves. By the back half of the 20th century, manufacturers had switched to making them out of polystyrene, and now they're back to making them from more biodegradable materials. The chickens didn't seem to notice. Today, about 60% of the eggs sold by the egg industry go to consumers, about 10% go to the food service industry, and the rest are used in other food products that include eggs. That's right, a whopping 30% of egg sales are just supplying other products that require eggs as an ingredient. That last part does actually account for some of the unpredictability of egg prices, but it doesn't paint the whole picture, nor does it tell us why eggs are so damn expensive right now. If the main question is, why are eggs so expensive? The main answer, in a word, is bird flu, or 2 words. Bird flu, also known as H5N1, is caused by avian influenza type A viruses. Those viruses typically spread among waterfowl, but can also affect other birds, like, for instance, chickens. It rarely affects humans, but rarely doesn't mean never. The outbreaks of bird flu that are currently driving up egg prices, for example, are so far responsible for just under 70 cases of the illness in humans, and at least 1 death. But long story short, bird flu is the main reason why eggs were selling for roughly $4.60 a dozen in December of 2024, and doubled to over $9 by February of 2025. Since 2022, 2 separate waves of avian flu have necessitated the culling of over 100 million egg-laying hens. And culling is not a handsome, brooding vampire. Those 100 million egg-producing chickens were euthanized. That drastically reduced the supply of eggs, but there has been no corresponding drop in the demand for eggs. When people still really want something, but there isn't enough of that thing to go around, the law of supply and demand kicks in and bam! You've got your $9 dozen. Okay, there's a little more to it than that. Demand for eggs has actually increased in recent years, as many Americans have reduced the amount of red meat they eat in favor of other sources of protein, like chicken and eggs. All of those factors play a part in why the price of eggs has inflated roughly 37% over the past year, compared to overall food prices, which are up 2.5%. We hate to continue being the bearer of bad eggs, but if you're wondering when a dozen huevos are finally going to start getting cheaper, the answer is not anytime soon. Barring an unprecedented drop in demand, prices will remain high until egg suppliers can replace all those culled chickens. And new outbreaks of avian flu are still being regularly reported. In fact, the U.S. Department of Agriculture has indicated it doesn't expect the price of eggs to return to pre-outbreak levels until sometime after 2025, at the earliest. Now, it would be great if eggs were the only food currently being affected by inflation. But of course, that's not the case. In 2022, inflation jumped to a level it hasn't hit in 40 years, and the price of almost everything was affected in one way or another. Some of the biggest products affected were staple cooking items. In 2022, the price of margarine, for example, was up almost 44%. Butter was up over 31%. Flour and the various prepared mixes thereof were up almost 24%. Various dairy products were up over 25%. 21%. The price of fats and oils were up about the same amount, and the price of cereal and baked goods jumped almost 17%. Even if you just wanted to make a salad, lettuce was up almost 25%. But we're not even close to done. Potatoes, canned vegetables, coffee, sugar and its various substitutes, spices, seasonings and condiments, soft drinks, and even candy and chewing gum have all seen price increases between 10 and 17%. Meanwhile, the price of meat has increased, with chicken seeing the biggest increase of almost 17%. Pork, beef, veal, and seafood also saw price jumps. And that can't have anything to do with bird flu, right? Well, it's complicated. Inflation just doesn't affect the price you pay for food at the store. For instance, that food has to be shipped to the grocery store first. And the price of fuel oil was recently up almost 42%, which essentially put an inflation-related surcharge on everything. You're paying more for food in part because it costs more for the food to make its way to your town. And even though it's a world away for Americans, Russia's invasion of Ukraine affected food prices around the globe by adding to the price of energy. With lingering supply chain disruptions left over from the COVID pandemic, it all added up to a historical level of inflation. For comparison, in 2016, the price of food actually deflated by 0.1%, and it only rose an average of 1.7% over the following 3 years. But starting in 2020, inflation spiked to almost 4%, and prices started rising. They were up another 6.3% in 2021, and in 2022, a whopping 10.4%. The world hadn't really seen anything like it since the 1970s, when prices inflated by over 13% in 1973 and 1974, and over 10% in 1979. All that is part of the reason meals at schools spiked up over 305%. And school kids aren't the only ones feeling the pinch. Restaurants like IHOP and Applebee's have reported an uptick in high-income customers. In other words, the kind of people who would never eat at an IHOP or Applebee's because it's not fancy enough for them are now trading down because their preferred dining spots are suddenly way too expensive. Meanwhile, the rest of us who are fine eating at the IHOPs and Applebee's of the world have just given up on eating out altogether because it's too hard to justify the expense. Those people are doing a lot more eating at home these days, and they're not even necessarily eating the foods they really like or in the quantities they're used to. As if we didn't have enough problems already, climate change may also be driving up food prices and will continue to do so for some time. A 2024 study, for example, found that unusually high temperatures, like the kind that have been affecting Europe in recent years, persistently push up the price of food in both high and low-income countries. European food prices spiked as much as 19% in parts of 2022 and 2023, and the additional temperature increases expected to hit the continent by 2035 are expected to exacerbate food prices by a terrifying 30 to 50%. And we hope you don't like olive oil. No offense to Popeye.
Oh, Popeye, I'm afraid.
You got nothing to worry about, Olive.
Olive oil production around the world, particularly in the Mediterranean region, declined by a third between 2021 and 2024 due to high temperatures, fueling a massive 70% spike in the cost of the product in some areas. Another problem is changes in precipitation. For example, in 2023, the UK experienced its 7th wettest year since they began keeping records on such things way back in 1836. The additional rainfall affected both crop planting times and harvests, and the effect was a huge decrease in the production of vegetables, wheat, barley, and oats. Production of all these crops is expected to drop even further this year, which will likely wreak further havoc with food prices. Extreme precipitation has also severely impacted China's ability to grow rice. Between 1999 and 2012 alone, China's rice yield declined by 8%. That's a big deal because China is the single biggest producer of rice and wheat in the world. China's Ministry of Ecology and Environment said in a 2018 report that climate change had significantly impacted cropping systems, increased the spread of dangerous pests, and significantly shortened the growing season. Meanwhile, over in the U.S., orange juice prices have been steadily rising for years, partially because of the extreme weather in Brazil. Why? Because Brazil is the biggest producer of oranges in the world, a source the U.S. depends on for much of its orange juice. And you shouldn't expect those price increases to reverse themselves anytime soon. Thanks to climate change-related flooding and drought, Brazil is expected to have their worst orange harvest in almost 40 years in 2025. Now, even though a great deal of American orange juice is squeezed from Brazilian oranges, the USA is still the third biggest producer of oranges in the world. But in recent years, production yields have been down, way down. Orange production in the US actually dropped over 40% between 2020 and 2024. Heck, in Florida alone, orange production dropped over 50% between the 2021 and 2022 harvests. A big part of that drop was due to Hurricane Andrew, which some climatologists believe was made more severe by the effects of climate change. So given all this, you're probably wondering what you, the consumer, can do to control what you pay for eggs. Well, unless you have the cure for avian flu, which we're going to assume you don't, your options are pretty limited. Other strategies include choosing store brands over name brands and switching to egg alternatives like ground flax, mashed banana, and chickpea liquid where you can. Chickpea liquid and bananas do not sound like they would make a decent Denver omelet, but some say your desire for eggs is simply because you're familiar with them. And if you gave it a chance, you would get used to, like, and love chickpea liquid. If an egg substitute just isn't going to scramble in your house, Experts recommend you buy it in bulk. That might be tricky, since major retailers, like Trader Joe's and Costco, have been increasingly limiting the number of eggs any one consumer can purchase. Also, I don't know if you've heard, but eggs are pretty expensive lately, so if you can buy bulk, you probably should whenever possible. Or try to pull an Ocean's Egg-11. So what do you think? Has the rising price of eggs affected you? Or are you more of a Pop-Tart kind of person? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other weird history food videos.